Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking your time to watch my videos. I'm continuing my analysis into human rights. This is going to be a multi-part, multi-hour assessment of human rights. The text that I'm using will be Human Rights in the World Community. It's an amazing book. All of the various forms of human rights concepts pertaining to human rights discussions comes exclusively from this text. I will more than likely within the next 4 to 6 months do a second installment on human rights, because there was just so much in the text. I wasn't able to incorporate many ideas, so I recognize the limitation of this lecture series, but this will be the first series that I'll have multi-part sections to the series. I'll do Human Rights Lecture Part 1, Human Rights Lecture Part 2, maybe even a third installment of this. So in its entirety it'll be long, but I have written all of the notes. It took me a little bit under a month to compile all of the notes necessary to prepare this lecture. The notes can be accessed online. For those of you who watch my videos, you already know this. Click the link in the description box or the banner that pops up. It'll take you to the PDF. Download the PDF. The notes are 25 pages long. Print it out, follow along, and let's begin. So this is section 2 of human rights. This is human rights. And this is section 2. And this is, this also covers, we're still within the context of the original piece, Weston. This is from page 17 through 24. 17 through 24 in this book, Human Rights in the World Community. And with that, let's begin. We're at the top of page 3 in my notes. All right, so the emergence of human rights after Nazi Germany. The emergence of human rights after Nazi Germany. This is a quote from Weston's section in the edited work on page 19. Quote, number 1, quote, "It is not until the rise and fall of Nazi Germany that the idea of human rights truly came into its own." Right? It's not until after Nazi Germany that the idea of human rights truly came into its own. So, human rights gained form after, right? It is not until after, it's a direct quote, it is not until the rise and fall of Nazi Germany that the idea of human rights truly came into its own. And the question is, well, let me just backtrack first. Remember what we said from the last hour of lecture. We said that the notion of human rights is a product of our historical development. Some of the characteristics, let's say we say human rights as defined here, some of the preconditions to human rights, right? Some of the preconditions, one of the preconditions that we saw was the notion of freedom, right? Another of the preconditions that we saw was one of liberty. Another of the preconditions that we saw was one of equality. And then now we're seeing that another precondition is the rise and the fall of, right? The rise and the fall of Nazi Germany. Now, we know the atrocities, we know the horrors that took place under that regime, right? We know what National Socialism did. We know the impact globally that it had. It is out of that atrocity, however, that we ultimately arrive at the notion of human rights. Human rights as a concept. This is important, right? And I stressed the distinction before. Human rights as a concept arose, as a notion arose out of some of these preconditions. Human rights when we're talking about the universal, inalienable rights that human beings have, isn't contingent on historical development, right? We have these rights atemporally, right? At least conceptually, atemporally, right? They exist atemporally, right? They exist beyond, outside of this space of time, right? You have these rights a priori. However, at least this is one argument, you have these rights a priori. However, they develop as a succession of events, as the development of ideas give body to the concept, and now we can conceptualize it. An antithetical claim is not necessarily an antithetical, but a variation of this claim is to say that our rights develop as a consequence of convention. We know that this has to do with its utility. We know that that has to do with what are known as positive. Right? So these are almost interchangeable, right? Utility, convention, positive rights, which would mean that it's not the case that there is this sort of universally generalized conception that we can ascribe to, that these rights come as a consequence of our having contracted into a particular geographic social setting. So I'm not here to debate which one is right. We see that there is an articulation of natural law theory, and it has its place. We see that both Bentham and Mill, in the last discussion, critique this. Bentham saying that it was, what was his famous line? I forget. It was stilts, nonsense upon stilts, right? The idea for him was nonsense upon stilts. I'm not here to say who's right or who's wrong. My approach is just to sort of lay out the overarching assessment of rights as such. Okay, number two, right? So, again, the emergence of human rights after Nazi Germany. We see that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR addresses a pretty important point, and I want to spend a little bit of time discussing this because I think it's pertinent not only to the lecture of human rights, but specifically to a lot of the phenomena that's happening in 21st century socio-political, socio-cultural setting globally. Not just within the United States, but globally. I think this is relevant. So this is the Four Freedoms speech, right? It's the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it's called the Four Freedoms, F-R-E-E-D-O. The Four Freedoms speech, that's the name of the speech, from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This was given January 6, 1941. First thing we have to recognize. The first is a freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. Again, not just within the United States, but the first is a freedom of speech and expression. Right? A freedom of speech and expression. Remember, we're focusing on one of the component parts, right? One of the conceptual preconditions, if you will, to the idea of human rights. And Chomsky actually, I forget which, and it is Chomsky. Chomsky, I forget which one of his books it was, talks specifically about this idea of, at least within the States, the idea of free speech. So I just want to, this is not FDR, this is Chomsky, but he's absolutely right. There's a huge misconception in the idea that individuals have a right to free speech. The whole point of preserving a right to free speech is to preserve the right to this type of speech that you actually don't want to hear. So, as a black man, I don't want to hear bigoted, racist speech, right? I don't want to hear white supremacist speech. I don't want to hear that. White people don't want to hear bigoted, racist, black power speech, right? They don't want to hear that. they are as